Good morning to some of you, good evening to others. Okay. Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Lulu. I'm the head of teacher experience at Flint. On this call here today, we also have Sohan, CEO of Flint, and Sun, who is new to the team. She's our marketing person. And yeah, and we've got a bunch of teachers, some who I've already kind of singled out and asked to share about this topic, and some who I might also call on because I see some familiar faces here. But yeah, thank you all for making it to this session on IB exam review using AI. Yeah, I understand this is probably top of mind for you all throughout the year, but now especially becoming top of mind for students. So I wanted to talk about how you can use Flint in creating activities for students to use, and also I'll touch on how you can use chats, both for yourself and instruct students to use chats and activities so that they can better prepare for their IB exams. Yeah, in terms of what we'll cover today, I've chosen some like ice-breaking news, as I like to call it, to kind of start off the conversation, just get like the vibes flowing of having everyone chat about this topic. Then I'll cover some review activities in Flint and then review chats in Flint. And then we'll have time at the end for individual teachers to share what they've been doing in Flint with their students when it comes to IB revision. Great. And yeah, housekeeping items. The recording will be available later, probably later today or early tomorrow. And questions are welcome at any time. Feel free to just pause me if you get lost. But yeah, to start off with the ice-breaking news, typically I like to look for something a bit more controversial, but I saw this really feel-good article about IB, and I thought it really fits this topic. But essentially, Forbes is saying that IB's approaches to learning are essential for the AI era. Specifically, this author was saying how he found some research about how 1 in 6 companies are hesitant to hire recent college grads because they have a lack of experience and resilience, practical experience, that is. They say that, they possess all of this theoretical knowledge, but they often struggle to adapt to the dynamic demands of the marketplace or workplace. And he's arguing that through the IB program, teaching students how to learn rather than what to learn, the program really prepares these Gen Z students to adapt to the ever-changing demands of the modern economy. And so I've been seeing more of this focus on, the process of learning. And I think there's like the spectrum that can exist where there's like this 100% focus on process. Eventually, content might even be disregarded if the argument is that AI can just be your content um, subject matter expert almost. But then like on the other flip side of this, traditional learning has this really heavy focus on content. And I think IB kind of lies in the middle. So I want to ask you all, what do you think about this? Do you think employers are right in their way to be hesitant about theoretical knowledge? What do you think of the balance between soft and hard skills? Um, yeah, feel free to chime in, anyone. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maninder, I might go ahead and call on you if you have any thoughts on this.
Well, that was quick. I guess the important thing to remember is that in an IB subject, like say, for example, physics, your the IB is very content driven, and when it comes to the sciences, the syllabus is deep, the syllabus is large, and while there is this desire to hold on to almost an idealistic understanding of what the nature of learning is in terms of a science subject, you still have to teach the content. And the process of learning the content is the key. It doesn't really matter what you teach. What matters is how the kids learn it. So therefore, the content is super important. you don't just want to teach anything, you have to teach something. And in a subject like physics, we have very specific content that we need to deliver in the syllabus. Now, how you deliver that content, students how students assimilate and synthesize and understand it, that's important, right? And that's, I think, what we're kind of talking about here. So this idea that 100% focus on content process is disregarded, well, I mean, that doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, the reality is they're part and parcel of each other. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. And James also in the chat seeming to agree that there is a lot of content focus. Um, yeah, I don't know if you wanted to touch more on that, James. If not, all good. Yeah, does anyone disagree with the idea that the content must be super tied to the process? Oh yeah, James, I saw you unmuted. Did you have thoughts on it?
Yeah, I do agree with Marinder that it's especially math HLs and bio. I mean, I know those people are, and even with math HL, we're still teaching content all the way up until, students are getting ready for exams. So the content is so much. And if you try to do some of those investigative tasks or some of that, alternate ways of learning, it just takes up time. And when will IB adjust to that? That's the question. And the same thing with adjusting to writing internal assessments. We're fighting that all the time now with AI. So there's going to have to be something's going to have to give way at some point.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And Carla's saying in the case of group 1 and 2, mechanics of assessment are stricter than prescribed content, in your opinion. Yeah, did you want to elaborate on that? Yeah. I also wonder if this the balance between the process and the content varies a lot based on the subject. Yeah, for math and science, where there are certain processes and formulas and ways of solving problems that you need to learn, versus maybe other topics that have more soft skills if those don't require as much of the content. But yeah. Yeah, but honestly, this is good. I think part of the beauty of Flint actually is that you can put in your own content and have that inform how your activities are structured. So, we're focusing on giving students more of this critical thinking process and having that process be designable and customizable by teachers. So yeah, I like that you all do recognize that the focus of content is very important. And to translate that into Flint, I would definitely recommend that you all upload your own content, put in, practice problems that you see have helped students really prep for exams, or yeah, or different essay prompts that have helped a lot. Things like that. All of that can help inform best how activities can be made in Flint. So I'll go ahead and move on to the next section in the interest of time. But yeah, this is kind of a summary of what Flint is trying to do for students. On the right-hand side here, you can see the dichotomy between a typical chatbot where honestly it kind of defaults to passive learning or even shortcutting learning. The students can ask it a bunch of questions, it'll just give them the answers. They're just reading that explanation. Whereas Flint honestly is trying to foster more active learning with critical thinking, immediate feedback. So it'll be the one prompting the student as long as that's how you design it to. So yeah, you can use Flint chats and activities to generate additional problem solving practice that can be interactive for the students. You can use it to differentiate multiple choice question practice. I'll show you how to do that in a sec also. You can have it act as an oral speaking partner as well and give feedback on writing too. So all of these different aspects of the IBDP where students are taking tests, but also needing to do their orals and have a lot of writing as well. All of that can be supported through Flint. And so really quickly, I'm going to show you all what that looks like in the product. So here's Flint. Hopefully most of you all have seen it. But essentially on this homepage, you have both chats and activities, and chats for teachers and also from the student view. You can see both of those. I'll return to the chats in a little bit, since the activities are more of the bread and butter of our platform. So these are some popular ways of using Flint that we have pulled out and brought to the forefront. But really, you can always create a custom activity to do whatever you want it to. I'm going to go ahead and create a quiz for students on specified material, kind of basically along the lines of what we were talking about earlier, where the content and the process should go hand in hand. So here, I'm going to say I want IB biology students to study for their DP exam, and I'm asking Flint to give them extra multiple choice problem questions that are similar to the ones on this website. And this website, just to show you all really quickly, once it loads, has a mock exam with a bunch of multiple choice questions. Yeah, so I'm providing this to Flint so that it knows the structure of the questions and the content that I want to cover. Of course, I can add even more to the upload here with my own syllabus or other materials, other practice problems. But basically, I want Flint to help use AI to generate additional problems so that the students just get more and more reps in. Yeah, so here it's going to read this attachment that I sent it. Now it's going to create its own exam to attach. And then now it's saying, let me make changes. So that means that Flint is building out all of the prompting on the back end. All of these different steps are things that, I don't have to do manually. I don't have to write out the prompt. So that's why we always suggest using this chat to build with Flint. And yeah, now that it's created this activity for me, it'll show me all of the settings that it's created. And then on the right-hand side here, a preview has appeared for me to try out. So I can either simulate this, maybe see what like a just satisfactory answer looks like. See that it's creating questions and it's also explaining the answers to the students. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I can also try it out manually. I would suggest doing both the simulation and the manual, and just acting like how you understand your students would act so that you can double check that the behavior is how you would want it to be. Yeah, typically, for those of you who haven't built activities yet, the process looks like this, where you give it some input, you try it out, and then you might ask for more revisions. So here I could say, if a student gets a question wrong, make sure to ask them 2 more questions on the same topic. So really like honing in on practicing things that students are struggling with. Yeah, and it's able to make that change for me. So you can request it to do anything like that and try it out again. Once you're happy with it, once you're happy with the process that you've created here, all you have to do is create the activity, and then you can move it into the group for your students so that they have all of these practice activities in one place, or you can share the link with them directly and they'll be brought to the session where they can get started. Any questions about activity creation? I'll also show a couple other examples. Great. If things pop up, also feel free to throw them in the chat. I think Sohan would be happy to assist with those answers as well. Yeah, so I did mention how you can use Flint for oral practice. So here's an example where students are doing IB German oral practice. Sorry, I picked German because that's the only other language that I know that is, readable by everyone somewhat. So yeah, they're doing the typical structure where they're looking at an image, they're presenting their thoughts for 3 to 4 minutes, and then there's an ensuing conversation on what they've presented. And so once you have student submissions, you can always see what's, what's completed, what's in progress, and then you can go through and see the session analysis that was given to the student, the final feedback of what they did well, where they could improve. And then you can also see the entire transcript of their conversation. And so here I can even listen back to what I said, and you can play the audio of the student speaking. In diesem Bild gibt es 4 Jugendliche, die, obwohl sie zusammen sind, gucken nur auf dem Handys. So you can hear that, like, even though it looks like, I had this really nice sentence about how the students are looking at their phones, the hesitation is still there. So that's where, like, you might go see a student and say, hey, like, I want you to practice the fluency of your speech and just practice, make sure that you understand this topic and the vocabulary and sentence structures here. But yeah, to also show you all what this looks like from a student perspective, and I can stop that there. Earlier when we were looking at it, it had like all of the transcribed writing, right? But here, actually, I created this activity so that students have to listen only. They can see the image, but they don't see the text. So practicing their listening comprehension. But also to respond, they can't type here. They also must speak. So that's like really, Flint gives you that flexibility to decide what the input and output will be. And you can really have students practice very realistic oral presentations that way. Okay, and then in terms of writing feedback, Flint can also help there. Typically, we see teachers putting in the prompt and maybe the way that they want students to be evaluated. And in this example, students were writing a literature paper, and I actually gave Flint this official IB prompt to have students practice from. And then, yeah, you can make it so that the students paste their writing in. And then here, I actually asked it to give them 3 specific ways to improve, to deepen. So it's giving like the feedback of how it wants me to deepen analysis, strengthen textual evidence, and develop a more nuanced conclusion. And then students can always then go into Flint and continue this conversation, asking more follow-up questions, asking for examples. I will say with writing, teachers sometimes overlook the fact that AI is a little too helpful. So here it's like, writing suggestions for revision paragraphs, which in this case might be good, like giving students examples of how they can improve writing if this is not an activity that they're going back to and like turning in for themselves. But you can always go back in, add more prompting to make sure that it, doesn't do that for students. So here I'm actually, this was after I asked it to give feedback step by step, not all at once. Not include written suggestions, like do not write any parts of the paper or write any examples for the student. And then also I asked it to be more concise in general. Yeah, so here you can see like it's giving more specific feedback, a point at a time. And then it's, when I ask it for follow-up on how, if it could explain more on this first point that it gave me, it gives me more feedback for how I could do this rather than just showing me. Yeah, go ahead, Maurice.
Oh, hi there. I'm just wondering, for when you're doing these written practices, are you also having to upload the rubrics, or is it already in the database?
Yeah, I would say it's best to upload the rubric. Otherwise, Flint will create a pretty generic one. So it'll have a rubric to work off of, but it just makes one based on like its content knowledge.
Would it also be able to analyze, like, if you were to give it like the report, like the end of the year report that we get from the IB in terms of how the students should have answered? Like, I'm a language teacher, so I'm thinking about the paper one for ab initio when there's 6 different prompts, and then what the teachers get back is they get back the feedback on how the students should have answered and which was the correct text type and all that. So it ends up being quite a hefty document. Would I be able to upload that and get my students to practice some of those prompts, and then it could use that as the way that it would assess?
Yeah, that actually seems like the perfect content to upload. If it's super hefty, like over 100 pages, double spaced, then you might need to like chunk it, because there's like a limit to the size of the attachment that you can add into Flint.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be that long. It would be about maybe 15-ish pages.
Oh, okay, yeah, you can upload that, no problem, and have that be what Flint is relying on for feedback to students. Yeah, sounds like a really good idea, actually. Great. Yeah, so that is essentially some ideas for activities that you can make. Just in general, to kind of wrap up this section, some tips I would say is definitely preview and iterate, and preview and iterate. Of course, if it's just for practice, like you don't necessarily need Flint to be super strict with students, but that's still just best practice for creating activities that are behaving in the way that you want it to. Yeah, and like the example that Marie shared, providing examples to Flint, providing extra content, extra guidance. We like to compare it to a teaching assistant. What would you give a teaching assistant who walked into your classroom and is trying to help your students out? What would be helpful to them to be able to know how best to give them feedback and guide them in a way? Carla is asking how many docs can be attached or preloaded. So it's about 16 documents of 100 pages each double spaced or 50 single spaced. Flint will tell you if you're like hitting that limit too. Yeah. And yeah, like earlier, I used this middle prompt to kind of hone in on the activity I was making of if students struggle with a topic, ask them 2 more questions. But you can also tell it to do things like make questions harder as students get them right. If a student gets an answer wrong, have them try again. So things like this can really change the experience for your students. So yeah, you can ask Flint to be your partner in brainstorming what that can look like, or I find that a lot of teachers working together to create activities can also help here. Okay, and then for review chats in Flint, so the activities that we were making, they're kind of like you're designing your own team of teaching assistants is what we like to say. But for the chats, it's kind of like you or students are chatting with an AI individually. So here, going back to the platform, let's see this one. So yeah, on the homepage, the first section here are the chats. And then as a teacher, you can have it generate materials for you that you can use with students. And so I'm going to ask it to create a worksheet. And then I want it to actually generate 3 alternative versions of this worksheet that I'm uploading with 10 multiple choice questions each. And this worksheet that I'm uploading is this chemistry test with 40 multiple choice questions. So I want it to create additional questions that are in the style that covers the same content so that, again, I can give students more practice. So when I send that over, it understands that I want it to make 3 alternative versions. It read through the attachment because it has access to the internet. And now it's going to create the 3 different alternative versions of the worksheet. And so here I just said like create 3, but I could say create like a easy, a medium, and a hard version. I could ask it to separate all of the topics and create practice worksheets for every subtopic within it. And then, yeah, here you can see it's created this question activity. It does have the answer key at the end, so like just double check what it's putting in there. Yeah, so I could ask it to create a version to give to the students, and then a version with answers and explanations even. And any of the worksheets that Flint is creating for you here, you can print, move to Google Drive, download, or just copy the content from. Yeah, so that's like a popular way that we've been seeing teachers use Flint to just create more material that they can use with their students. And then also, I'm just going to wait for it to finish its message. Okay. Also, if you're a teacher in Flint, you can see what the students see for their chat options. So we've also been seeing teachers kind of give students a little bit of training on how they can use Flint on their own, no matter the time of day, no matter what stage they're in their revision. And so here, like as a student, I could go in, tell Flint to quiz me on material. I would just make sure to tell your students like, hey, give students heads up that you're an IB student, and then make sure you specify what you want it to help you with. And so here I'm saying that I want it to help me practice probability. Flint's pretty smart about it and will ask some follow-up questions about what level I'm at and what specific concepts I want to practice. So here I could say like standard level conditional probability, and then Flint will start generating questions for me to answer. And as the students answer these, it'll give them explanations. It'll let them know if they're like going off track. So yeah, that's how you can get students to use Flint on their own. Yeah, so to summarize, you can create activities for students. They can be for structured lessons, or you can open it up for students to use at any time. Students can go back to an activity and get additional practice. I've even seen also some schools have students make activities for themselves. So I would say like this is great if they want super customized and recurring practice. Sometimes I see some students will make practice to share with their classmates too. So like in a study group, you could have each student create an activity and then share amongst themselves. But yeah, and then for chats, you can generate materials for students, and then you can also have students practice on their own. Go ahead, Maurice.
Hi, sorry, me again. So I created a group today for my grade 9 class, and I had the students join it, and I gave them a task that I created myself, and I let them play around with it for a little while. So I guess what you're saying now is like now that they're part of that class and they're subscribed, they can do these things that you just explained, right? They could create their own and say, I'm a phase 2, phase 3 language student, and I need more help practicing, and they can do all this without me having to push it out as an activity.
Yeah. They have the option to create their own activities. They can create their own paths. I've heard a lot of stories about how students are making their own tools throughout the school year to help them progress in specific subjects. Yeah, and even in our page on the left-hand side, we do have this templates library where students can go look for either ideas or pre-made activities that people have published to this library. And actually, the second one, or second most popular activity, was made by a student to help him with studying for the AP English language exam. So this one actually creates free response questions for him to practice and write essays too. Yeah. So yeah, I would just, of course, teach students to like be critical of what AI puts out. There are certain topics that AI is not as good at. For example, like spatial reasoning. An example that I like to say is like in a physics class, Flint might be able to do calculations really well because we give it a calculator and it can do the reasoning really well. But if you ask it to draw a free body diagram, AI is like not quite as good with that sort of super visual stuff yet.
Lulu, also, it's really important to remember that sometimes the AI gets it wrong. We've had experience at our school where we've asked Flint to be a test bot for the students. And at the low level, the questions are good and the questions, and then it will ask a question where it will tell a kid it's wrong, but actually
Mhm.
the kid is right and the AI is wrong. And that's happened a number of times, especially when the questions get quite complex.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've said to the students is this is an opportunity for critical thinking. Don't take what the AI chatbot tutor is saying at face value. You have to accept that it might make mistakes. It's one of the things we have to deal with, right?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah, so that's why like I feel a bit more comfortable in just telling you all to tell your students to use Flint at the high school level, where, hopefully they've developed more of that critical thinking and um, especially like I think keeping that open communication about how they're using Flint and just getting them to let you know like what they're trying it out with so that you can also double check that the topics that they're doing and like the level that they're using Flint at is actually helping them. That can be really important. Yeah, awesome. Any other questions about chats, activities in Flint? Great. Yeah. So the next section of this presentation is simply the share out and Q&A for the teachers who have been using Flint. I feel like, I can present so much about what I've heard and like what has been done, but it's probably best for you all to hear from other teachers who are actually using this in their classes and with their students. Yeah, so Maninder is someone that I asked to share his experiences, if you want to take it away for us.
Yeah, sure. So we've I'm a TOK coordinator at my school, and we have had the issue of students using AI to help them. And then, you run their drafts through, turn it in, and you'll get big AI hits. So one of the things we decided this year for the exhibition is to try to use Flint as like gatekeeping AI access. And so we created a TOK chatbot for the exhibition for the students to help them in terms of brainstorming, the kind of conversation you might have with a teacher. Well, there's 140 kids and they can have a conversation with it at any time. What's good is that we can see, one of the things I like about Flint is that we can see the conversation the kids are having with the chatbot about their exhibitions. And this is kind of an important thing because if you can't see what they're doing on AI, then you can't help support them. Because, yeah, your kids are allowed to cite AI now. So finding that sort of connection is the key. And that's one of the things that Flint's been good at, is giving us that. The other thing I do as a physics teacher is I create chatbot tutors for the students. But, one of my biggest issues was if you make it too broad, if you say, hey, here's the physics syllabus, right? Oh man, like no, no AI chatbot can handle that kind of amount of information at the moment. And if you tell it, hey, I'm a physics standard level teacher, it will grab the syllabus from 1997, not from 2025. So you really have to gatekeep the tutor as well. But if you take some time, and one of the things I like about it is the interaction you can have with the build with Flint. It's very good. It's a very powerful tool. It allows you to build it quite quickly. So today, for example, I had to create, well, not had to, I wanted to create a chatbot tutor for topic C, subsection 4 in the physics standard level syllabus. And I just copied and pasted my instructions from a previous one for topic C, subsection 3. But then in any section where there's content, I would just delete it and write, I'm going to add this later. And then I switched to build with Flint. And then I said, all right, what do you need from me? And it said, okay, give me the content. It went through the instructions that I had uploaded. and it said, oh, give me the content. And then I just copied and pasted from the syllabus, the very specifics. But then you have to tell it to not do anything different. Like you really have to guide it. And when you do that, it does a pretty good job. I've gotten good feedback from my students. So anyway, I don't want to, take up too much time. Happy to answer questions, but there you go.
Yeah, go ahead, Cassandra.
Can I just ask, when you say don't do anything differently, can you clarify what that is? Because that's been my struggle when I've been trying to use it. And I even copy an activity that worked. Sometimes the activity like legitimately just doesn't work. And because I often use it as an addition for students, like that I've already sort of exhausted what I have, rather than using it with all my students. I'm not devoting the time like you are. So yeah, if you could clarify that.
Did you, Sandra, did you watch the movie Blade Runner?
The old one.
Yeah, the old one. When Deckard is talking to one of the replicants, right? He's trying to figure it out. You have to have this conversation with it. It's kind of like that, and it takes a bit of time. And you have to say, okay, well, this is what I want you to do. And it'll say, oh, that's great. It's hyper positive, right? Because it's AI. And then it says, oh, that's really great. How about this? And you go, no, you've gone too far. This is SL. And it'll say, oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, but what about this? And you go, well, no, come back. And it takes a while to get it. But it will, when you say build with Flint, eventually come up with a really narrow core set of objectives. But the time you get it to do that, then you can replicate that quite easily for the other topics. But you kind of have to work with it in that there's this build with page, and you can either build it manually or build with Flint. And what I tend to do is I tend to build with Flint first, and then I'll go to manually and I'll copy and paste some stuff in, and then I'll go back to build with Flint. And I mean, it's a process, right? Like you're kind of teaching a child that's got access to the internet really quickly, and it will do what you want it to do, but man, does it take time. Like you really got to play with it. Now I'm at the point where it works, and a couple of teachers at my school and we've been having some fun with it, but you have to dedicate some time to it. So I respect that it's not always straightforward.
Yeah, one suggestion. Yeah, one suggestion there, Cassandra. Sometimes you can just ask the build with Flint, like, hey, what ways are you going to give students feedback, or what ways are you going to help students? Kind of like asking it about its own behavior can be a quick way to like see what its guidelines that it's written for itself are, and like how it actually anticipates to act upon that. But yeah, I do think what Maninder was explaining with like, going back and forth, unfortunately, that is like kind of how it's like the best way to like really hone in on the behavior.
Can I ask a second question? Sorry. Because I also teach TOK, and we also have experimented with using certain AI platforms that we have visibility over. How are you using AI to filter this? Or how are you like, I don't want to say policing, but I kind of want to say policing. Like, how are you policing this?
So there's a team of 8 of us, and we built the chatbot together, and then we tested it. We really tested it until we got it to the point where it would not give a student how to write something or suggest words, where it had to be just about being a teacher that you could bounce ideas off of, but without actually giving what to write. But it takes time to build that. Like you and your team have to take time to do that. The other thing that I liked about Flint was it gave us the option to create a group of us. So we've got 140 kids, all 140 kids chats are available for any teacher at any time to look at. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we've used Flint, because the school subscribed to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So basically you built a bot that is what they're using, and there's no real way to get it to actually do the writing part for you. Because see,
Correct.
yeah, so
Um,
what I was thinking is, because we used a different platform last year, and we were very like, we ended up having to use AI to be like, where have you written a narrative for the student? And then it was like, oh, we wrote it for these 4 kids. Or like it was more like we wrote it for like every single freaking kid. But yeah, it was interesting
yeah.
because
So
it was very challenging for as you said, for the chatbot to know like what, because it doesn't know what it's done wrong, because I mean, it hasn't done anything wrong in its eyes.
yeah.
But it was even challenging for it to like identify what we were asking for it to find that it had done. So yeah, it was a time consuming process. And in the end, we were like, wow, this was really not successful. So it's cool that you had success with that. That's a great thing for me to bring to my team.
Not at first. I'll be honest with you. We didn't have success at first. What we had to do was really test it. And we actually found one student who had somehow gotten Flint to help it write a section of their exhibition. And we had to talk to that kid, and we had to, be careful with what the kid did with that work. But we, every single time, then we would reiterate and reiterate. Again, I go back to the Blade Runner thing. Like, that's where we are at the moment. You really got to have that back and forth conversation with it. It can take time, but here's the key. We know the kids are going to go to AI to get support. So what we've told our students is this is the only AI you're allowed to use. If we discover that you've used something else and you get an AI hit and turn it in, we're not going to accept your work. But if you use this AI that we can see that you used and you get an AI hit, then we're okay with that, right? Because then we can say, hey, you forgot to cite this properly. We can look through the kids' chats. And that's kind of the key, is gatekeeping. And a colleague of mine called it authenticating students' work, right? So how do you authenticate kids' work? Well, every kid's using AI now. So you need to use a tool that allows you to manage students' work on AI. So that's kind of what we're doing. Anyway, hope that
Yeah,
helps.
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Maninder, I don't know if you and your team would be open to publishing any templates of what you've built, but I think the group here might be happy to like see what the exact setup is in the back end there. Feel free to let me know after this call, and I can like add it to the recording and all of those resources. But yeah, I also had asked Cristian from Le Mans Manhattan Prep in New York to share his experiences as a Spanish teacher, like how you've been using Flint with your students.
Yeah. Hi, thank you. This is a great conversation. I'm learning so much. I also teach TOK other than Spanish, but I think enough has been said about TOK. I'm learning a lot. It's really interesting. I think the main use, and I might digress a little bit from the IB exams, is role playing. I try to get the students to practice what they've been learning on the units and get on role playing. That role playing can be the IB exam per se, as you presented some of the ideas. The thing that is interesting to me, I'm also doing my PhD dissertation on the USA of AI and feedback interactions. So basically, what Maninder you're talking about is like you're giving feedback back to the. I mean, we're teachers, we're pretty good at that. Back to the AI. So now we have this role in which we are like managing the feedback in all 3 directions, right? Like coming one way, the other, and trying to understand that. So I'm looking into that quite a lot. Mostly how the students' emotional experiences are going with it. So if the students don't, I mean, people have been talking about that in this conversation. How the students are telling you, do they like it or not? Like that's like a big deal for us. Like, are they actually enjoying the process and stuff? So I'm really being careful about all those experiences and how they interact with each other. But a typical activity for me will be like, I don't know, like we're in ab initio and it's year 1, we talk about like, I don't know, food. It could be like healthy food or at a restaurant or something. So I develop an activity that somehow includes this, and I let Flint help me even with the ideas. It's like, this is the topic, what would be a good role play to have. And I'm excited how, like from a few months ago, maybe, yeah, a few months ago, and like how difficult it was to create an activity that didn't make it many mistakes to how it is now. It's been improving quite a lot. It's a mixed bag of experiences for the students sometimes, but I think that it is working pretty well. This role playing interaction, oral interaction, especially with like big classes, and having like like a quote unquote tutor that can speak with them, that can give them feedback, that you can see the whole process. You can see it like written or spoken. That also makes a big difference, and the first steps. I do teach ab initio SL and HL, so like adapting to what are the needs for the different ones. So I'm open to any questions. Thank you for your time.
Hi,
Maurice,
Christian.
other
So
question?
yeah, so I guess it's similar because it was mentioned a little bit earlier before this way of doing this conversation practice. Do you do that option where you're just limiting it so the students have to use the voice function, and then like the way that you would do this within a class is maybe you'd give the students like 10 to 15 minutes to like leave the classroom to do the practice spoken with the bots, and then you at a later time are looking at are you listening to the audio samples that they've all done?
So that's a logistical question more than anything, right? It really depends on how much time do you have to go through things, like the setting of your classroom, if you have spaces. The students can technically do it in a class with noise canceling headphones and mindful of their like the volume they're speaking at. They could have a class of like 20 or 30, and if they understand that, it's technically possible. But you do need to have like the technical capability to do that. I've not like allowed them to either do it on class during this time, or I usually what I do if I'm gonna cut it to only oral, which I don't always do. But if I'm gonna do that, I do give them the time in class. If they want to leave, they can leave. It's like 10, 15 minutes. I'm pretty flexible like that. The school allows that. But I also leave it open until like the next Friday. So if they don't feel like that's a good time or a good moment, or there's pressure, they don't want to be heard by other peers, they can do it on their own time. I don't really give it as homework, but if they want to take it as homework, that's their choice, and I don't assign it for that at the end of that class. So they have the option of doing it some other time. If somebody was missing that day, they can still do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I also have a question. Do you usually use Flint just for practice, or do you also use it for like actual assignments and even assessments?
So far, it's only been practice. I'm looking into it, but I will have to look at a lot more feedback from Flint and accuracy. I know some of my colleagues have used it for the AI this year. I mean the IA this year. AI, so many AIs for the IA this year to double check the grades that they get. Like they will run the IOs and the internal assessments, internal orals, through Flint, and see after they graded themselves to see what grade they will give, and they were fairly accurate, fairly equal. Also, like this is a teacher that has been doing this for the first year, so it really just she was just not feeling super strong, but it gave her some sense of like security that at least it was similar to the AI. But I haven't done it myself yet. Yeah. If I include it on the grades, it's more than anything for completion. They have done the amount of time, or like the rubric for it will be like, have you interacted this amount of times with they, or have spoken this amount of time? And not checking for, especially because I'm testing the emotions. If I put more pressure on it, the achievement emotions will go through the roof and probably just be negative instead of positive. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I know I've heard from a lot of world language teachers that the beauty of Flint is that every student is getting that practice, because in a typical classroom you might have students who don't raise their hand as much, or even if you pair students up, like some students are stronger than others, so at least like the AI is kind of at this base level where it can have a conversation with every student and really help them out. Oh yeah, hi Anthony, I see you on the call. Do you also want to share what you've been doing with Flint and IB?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I've used it a lot for, I'm a French teacher, so for the internal assessment, especially for the part 2 and 3 where they have to answer questions. So I fed all the questions to Flint and created an oral only activity, and the feedback was great. I was a little, it was touch and go a little bit because it's the first time I'm doing this, and I wasn't sure how the kids would react to it too, but they loved it. They told me it's like having 25 U's in the classroom. I'm like, okay, I'm being replaced already, but but it was really great. And the feedback that Flint, I was actually very surprised, was really right on, like on the dot with the feedback. And some of them created extra activities to work on the little things they needed to work on here and there. One maybe issue is that sometimes, because the French they speak is very is tainted by their first language, and the accent, sometimes some of the words were harder for the AI to be recognized. But I guess it's not perfect, of course. Honestly, and we did the IAs just before the March break here, and yeah, some of them, they really surprised me, and I could tell that the practice that they did really helped them out. So yeah, that was very positive.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Anthony. In the interest of time, I'll go ahead and wrap up so that you all are not on here forever. But yeah, so next week we have an AP exam review session. If you showed up to this one, probably don't need to show up to the next one. But yeah, the recording will be available later too if you want to hear what they did for their exam review. Yeah, and I have 2 QR codes here. On the left-hand side, there's the Campfire calendar. So we run one of these sessions basically every week. The different topics kind of vary from time to time. Yeah, sometimes we do like subject-specific ones. Sometimes we do like task-specific ones, like using Flint for writing feedback. But yeah, you can subscribe there, and then you'll be notified whenever a new session is posted. And then also we have a educator Facebook group. This is where I would like suggest continuing the conversation. If you want to connect with other educators who are using Flint in various capacities, you can always join that group and post questions in there. And our team is also pretty active in there in case there's like technical questions that we can answer. Yeah. And yeah, I'll post a recording. Anyone who registered to it will get a direct link to it too. But you can also go to our webinars page to look for that. Great. Any questions, comments, concerns? Yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
I just wanted to add before you go, something that I've been doing to kind of like address the previous conversations is using another AI to help me with the prompting as well, and just asking, for example, ChatGPT, look, I'm using Flint and I'm having these issues when I'm trying to create, like, when the AI is being too creative, and I just go through that, and it gives me like a few things that I can add to all of my prompts. So I just copy and paste every time to make sure that the funnel that I want the AI to go through is always the same. And it's been helping being a little more accurate, because sometimes, as you said, it's very creative, too creative for us. So that's a little tip that I can give you and share with you.
Yeah, actually, I think that's maybe the second time I've heard of this happening, where teachers are using AIs to understand AI. Yeah, and I think what that teacher also said was like he would give all of the, if you look in the build manually in Flint, you can see all of the specific buckets of the settings. And so he like, you can also ask Flint to like give you this as a list, but he was able to provide like each of these different segments of the prompt, and then have ChatGPT like tell him what exactly to put in which prompt bucket. So like just like logistically, that's like how he made that work. But yeah, thanks. Any other final comments anyone wants to make? Great.
Yeah, just mine. Sorry. I asked a question about whether there was plans for integration with some of these digital textbook platforms. Like, I'm a librarian in our school and I manage their digital services or a portion of them. And I'm just increasingly concerned about a proliferation of things and tools and this and that, and there's different, so it just seems to me we have Cognity that have IB textbooks, and it would be really great to kind of bring those things together so that the Cognity would have all the information. We don't worry about validity of information, AI hallucinations, wrong information about thermodynamic laws of the natural world and all the rest of it. So there's a reliability problem, and I also think there's everything's just kind of breaking into too many different platforms. So this is a plea from the library services, and I think from the mental health standpoint of teachers and students, we just have too many options now, and we need some integrated solutions. Yeah, I mean, I think it's all super fantastic, but it would be so nice if it was a little bit more valid and reliable. And tied in with something else that we need. But thank you. I always learn something new every time I come on these. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a great question, Suza. And I'll say, like, I think at least for the next year or so, there will probably still be like an explosion in the number of tools and resources out there. But then our prediction, at least like going to year 2 and 3 from now, is that you'll see some more consolidation. So I think like some textbook publishers will be open to partnerships with companies like us, right, doing the AI side of things. And those are the textbooks that will continue to exist, but in a different format. But then, of course, there's going to be some that are against that, and they might kind of fall by the wayside or like kind of present their content in a different way. So I think we're definitely seeing like an explosion of like all these different formats right now. So it might take some time, but it's definitely something we're open to. If you have any folks at any of those companies that you want to put us in touch with, we'd be happy to kind of enter into those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of AI in the world right now. So what we need are more integrated, like horizon solutions, people that see things within the context of schools, within the context of safeguarding and all of that. But yeah, bravo. Keep going. Yeah.
Susa, to be brutally honest, I think this is going to be like when we tell our kids to be careful about what books they read and how they trust their sources, right? Like, I think that's where we are. We've got to teach the kids to be critical about their choices of believing what an AI says to them at the moment. I think that's where we are. We have to really teach them critical thinking about how much they believe what an AI is actually telling them and what they're good for and what they're not good for.
Absolutely. I have a screenshot from Nature newsletter saying, the takeaway on AI is don't trust it. So it's kind of like, well, we're returning back to the wheel, right? Because we've gone to the days of Wikipedia where teachers now have to say, well, you can use that as the beginning, but if you can't find that information any other place, triangulate it, some other source, then you have to discount it as being rubbish. And but unfortunately, in an educational setting, I find as a librarian that it's being sold to teachers and to students as like a quick fix, as a time saver, which your description of building your TOK thing is clearly not. Very skilled amount of work went into that. But the students are being delivered this tool and technology. And I've heard repeatedly, and much to my annoyance, that it is just like a calculator. Well, a calculator never gets 1 + 1 wrong. Calculators are reliable tools, and AI. So we're delivering these AI tools to students that haven't learned critical thinking yet. So there's a chicken egg problem, lots of ethics.
And don't forget, if you ask a calculator what 37 times 26 is, it doesn't first say, hey, great question. That's a wonderful question. I love that question. I think that's an excellent question, right? It just gives you the answer. It doesn't put emotion into it. And AI at the moment is very centered around a human connection, which is about positive emotional connection. And that's what we have to teach our kids about, is that it's being written that way. Like, we actually tone the positivity down on our AI bots. Like, I will write, stop being so positive. Right? And the kids ask me to do that. So one of the things I do with the chatbot tutors I create is I'll have a moment where I say, okay, kids, you've got the last 10 minutes of class. Ask it to ask you a question. And then I ask my students for how they feel about how it's going. And I will modify the chatbot as the kids are talking. And I'll say, okay, yeah, it's being too positive. All right. Oh, you want it to give shorter answers. And I will make the changes as the kids are giving me the feedback. So it's a powerful tool for that kind of, momentary educational point. But, it's got potential. It's got real potential to do that Bloom's 2 sigma paradox thing, right? But boy, does it ever have to be manipulated carefully, because it
Yeah.
can. Yeah. Yeah,
But
I
I
hear
think
you.
that's, then we got to be honest about that. And we got to be honest about it, not just with the kids, but, with the people that are jumping on this bandwagon thinking this is going to save them time, when really it's just a new way of teaching, and you still got to be a teacher. So, anyway, I know I sound negative, but I'm not. I'm very excited. And I was an early adopter. You can tell I'm a bit old, but I was the first person in my school to have a computer at home. And my dad launched satellites in the sky. So I'm not anti-science, but I'm just really kind of like, yeah. Anyway, but yeah, integrate it with some textbooks and improve the validity, and then we'd all be happier to give it to the kids without us having to monitor it as intensely as you clearly do. And we should, if we want it the way it is right now. But anyway, you're out of time.
Yeah, unfortunately, I got to go, but thank you
Yeah.
very much. Really nice to meet you all.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lulu.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.